And joining our discussion now, LaTosha Brown, co-founder of the Black Voters Matter Fund, and Maria Teresa Camara, president and CEO of Voto Latino and an MSNBC contributor. And LaTosha, here we see it again. They managed to come up with this last-minute maneuver that at least delayed when this bill might become a law, and we're not sure now whether it will.
You know, we're not. You know, I do want to commend the Democrats in Texas for having the courage and the fortitude to stand up for democracy. The bottom line is that the Republicans are going through extraordinary measures to do everything they can to actually attack voting rights in this country. And what we need is we have to have a response that is equally based on how extraordinary it is. And so I think with the Democrats stepping out last night is to let folks know how serious we are right now, how serious this is an issue of undermining democracy. We have to move forward. And I think that the U.S. Senate, even the Democrats in the Senate, can take a lesson of what we're seeing happening in Texas right now.
Let's listen to Democratic Texas State Representative Nicole Collier last night.
We've used all the tools in our toolbox to fight this bill. And tonight, we pulled out that last one. Now, listen, we may have won the war tonight, but the battle is not over.
Maria Teresa, the irony of this is these laws are being passed around the country in state legislatures where there's no filibuster provision for, Democratic senators in some of these states to block these kinds of bills so they can pass in a purely partisan way. And yet there is a Senate rule in Washington that will prevent the Democrats from passing their top priority on voting rights. And it's a Democratic Senator, Joe Manchin, who's preserving that ability of the United States Senate to be blocked by a minority, an ability that doesn't exist in the places where most of these bills are being passed.
You're absolutely right, Lawrence. What's happening in Texas, what's happening in Georgia, what happened in Arizona with the fraud that they did, making the voting booth now not accessible, is a pattern of the Republican Party, because what happened was they didn't like the results. All these three states that just passed these legislations, in Pennsylvania included, they have had certified elections that were verified and they were above board. In a place like Texas, they verified their election, saying there was zero fraud in their election system. And Texas has the most restrictive voting rights on the books. It's the most restrictive laws by far. But what we're seeing in the states like Arizona, in Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Texas, they all have one thing in common. And it's a booming young Latino population that's coming of age and eclipsing even older Latinos for the very first time. To give you an idea, Lawrence, in Texas, you're going to have 250,000 new eligible young Latino voters by 2022. So what they're trying to do is stack the deck. And what Joe Manchin needs to understand, and what Kristen Sinema needs to understand, is that our democracy is incredibly threatened because they're trying to change the rules because they don't like that a multicultural America is rising and it's disproportionately young, and they want a progressive America that embraces them. So Joe Manchin needs to recognize that if his own colleagues do not want to investigate what happened on January 6th, which was an insurrection against our democracy that put his own life and that of his staff on the line, they filibustered that into the darkness of the night. What is it going to prevent them from wanting to do the exact same thing for our democracy? He and Kristen Sinema need to recognize that the filibuster has no place in our democracy because our house is on fire. And the only way to fix this is by having universal federal regulations that gives every single state clear rules by which to play by. And he has to show the leadership that he can look in his grandchildren in the eye and say, I saved our democracy, and this is how I did it. Because there is a need to make sure that we are speaking very straight of what is on the line. The fact that Texas is dead last in access to the voting booth, according to the University of Illinois, Illinois University. Even that we know this for a fact. And now they're trying to make it more restrictive is because they see on the horizon a rise of young voters, and they just don't like the fact that they're going to lose if they do not play by the rules. And that is where Joe Manchin really needs to recognize that we need to get rid of that filibuster. It is adamantly important because otherwise our democracy might die not slowly, but overnight.
Let's listen to what Beto O'Rourke said this morning on Morning Joe about what happened in Texas last night.
Democrats in Texas did a lot. They bought us some time, and they stopped one of the worst voter suppression bills in the country. But when you link what they were trying to pass in Texas with what passed in Georgia, Florida, Iowa, Montana, what's pending in more than 40 other state legislatures, you see that we have the biggest attack on American democracy in our lifetimes.
LaTosha, your reaction to what Beto O'Rourke just said?
He's absolutely right. We have to really recognize this isn't just individual states. This is a concerted, coordinated effort literally to undermine democracy, particularly in those states where we're seeing communities of color and we're seeing young voters that have made the difference in terms of the outcome. And so we have to really attack this from on the local level, the state level, but we need sweeping legislation. The good news is that we have an opportunity right now. We have For the People Act and we have the John Lewis Voter Advancement Act. Both of those acts right now, given if they're passed in the Senate, will actually provide the kind of federal protection that we need. And so we've got to put pressure. We've got to put pressure on Democratic senators. We've got to put pressure. You know, the unfortunate thing about this is not a partisan issue. You know, we should not allow while the Republicans leading this voting rights, who I decide to vote for, Republican, Democrat, it's my right. That's my choice. But having access to the ballot is a democracy issue. We have to really move beyond democracy being propaganda and it being a core value in this country.
LaTosha Brown and Maria Teresa Kumar, thank you for joining our discussion tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence.